let's get to Arthur Schopenhauer.
Oh no! See, now this is the one I'm going to have very little to say about.
I actually like Schopenhauer a lot. Actually, I really do like him a lot. He's known as the pessimist philosopher.
Yeah.
And I read about him, and it's so interesting how there's a lot of things that he said that resonated with me that I disagree with now, but I feel like 10 years ago, I would have agreed with. Like a lot of his mentality is very negative and very dark, right? And 10 years ago, I was going through a lot of things. About 10 years ago, I was going through a lot of things, and I had the exact same mentality. But now I think what has shifted is me being intentional to look at things from a totally different perspective. And unfortunately, he never did. But, he's also an intellectual. He's a very intelligent person. And he was able to defend a whole lot of his negative view on reality. Almost makes you it's almost very inviting, like, oh, okay, maybe he's right here. But I have to hold on to, what I think I know.
I was talking about this with a friend of mine the other day that there's intuitions people have about what reality is really like. Obviously, we say, we can't really know.
Yeah.
Right? But we have like a guess or a feeling about what it is.
Yeah.
I think you and I both have this feeling, this intuition that reality is something rich and full and complete, and that if we could get in closer communion with it,
yes,
that like our lives would take on some of that richness and completeness.
Yes.
Now we'll disagree about exactly what form that is, right? But that we see reality deep down. It's like maybe this is like an act of faith. Or like
yes.
It's a good and beautiful thing. And Schopenhauer is the opposite.
Yes.
Right? It's like there's this intuition that deep down reality is sort of ugly and horrific and
irrational, he said.
Irrational, yeah. It's just like this constant activity, no end, no goal, except maybe the goal is something like more.
Yeah, it says like like hunger for more nothingness. So the paper that I wrote last semester, I just had like a little excerpt from
let's go.
So I wrote, just like Kant, Schopenhauer also believed that the world as we know and experience it is exclusively a representation created by our minds through our senses and forms of cognition. In other words, it is impossible for humans to experience a true reality. Instead, we experience a phenomenological experience of nature itself. Schopenhauer also believed in a singular unified oneness of reality. He calls the singularity the will.
The will.
Okay, and I did a lot of research on the will, and I think this podcast is probably too small for me to break down what he meant by the will. I think that's actually what his dissertation was on, the will. I like this quote that he. I want to get your opinion about this quote. He said, "Unless suffering is a direct and immediate object of life, our existence must entirely fail of its aim. It is absurd to look upon the enormous amount of pain that abounds everywhere in the world and originates in needs and necessities inseparable from life itself as serving no purpose at all and the result of mere chance. Each separate from misfortune as it comes seems no doubt to be something exceptional, but misfortune in general is the rule."
I mean, it's a very powerful claim, very strong claim. Right? So what he's saying is that if we look at existence, not just human existence, but animal existence too, the common factor in all of it is what he calls misfortune. Right?
Suffering.
The stuff that would be like, I wish that hadn't have happened. But that's not the exception. We act like it's the exception. Like, why did this happen to me? It's like, that is the rule.
That is what is
standard, right? The standard condition of everything that's alive is pain.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying.
Suffering.
And that pain is not just like optional stuff. He says it's in the process of just being alive. You're born, and the act of childbirth is pain.
It's painful.
Your teeth come in, right? The little kids that are teething, they're in pain.
Painful,
right? You go through puberty, it's painful. you have your heart broken, it's painful. Everything, like that's what life is. And so he says, it's so consistent that it would be ridiculous to say it's just by chance.
Yeah.
You know, it's like art just, well, it has no purpose. It just happens to always involve pain. You're like, how about this? That's the purpose of life. The purpose of life is to maximize suffering. And so if you wanted to, like, it would be a favor. You would be doing the universe a favor to stop existing.
So he calls this thing of what is, the noumena of what is the will, and it just seeks to create, like it just moves randomly. There's no rationality to it, and pain is all that it just brings, or suffering, he calls it, is all that it just brings. And it looks for more and more, and it's constantly growing, and trying to mitigate pain and suffering is just ridiculous. Like, you're just wasting your time. You might as well just lean into it. It is what it is, and there's no end to it that is logical, that is reasonable, that is like, you shouldn't, like for example, Christians pray
in like a higher purpose.
There's no higher purpose. Like, Christians pray to get into heaven when they die and things like that. There's no such thing, but more pain anyway, wherever it is you're going.
Until you're dead.
For all eternity.
Yeah.
So I think this is really interesting, because I know.
Now, I want to know why you said 10 years ago, this would have been really attractive to you.
Yeah, it would have been very attractive to me because.
Why would this have attracted you?
So this is one of the things that, I've done my research in Schopenhauer. I think one of the reasons why he had this mentality is because of his upbringing. He grew up very depressed, low self-esteem. His father, I believe, was like his best friend or something like that. And when his father died, and it's assumed that his father died of suicide, right? His mother took charge. He had a very authoritative mother. He's a bookworm. He likes to read. Philosophy is always his thing, but because his mother just couldn't care less, so she sort of like forced him into the family business type of thing. So he just had a very ugly life. His family was wealthy, so there's a lot of traveling involved. And I think this is a time in Europe where some war was happening or something like that. So he got to see a lot of.
There's always a war.
Exactly. One of those world wars or something like that. So he got to see a lot of the ugliness of humanity, people dying, pain, and things like that. So that, coupled with the fact that he had low self-esteem, depression, anxiety, his father dying of possible suicide, having a crazy mother, and things like that. There's just a whole lot of negativity around him. And if you know anything about, like psychologists tell you that a child's upbringing has a lot of influence in the type of adult they become, mentality and all kinds of stuff. So he always had life from a very negative perspective. And I think he was trying to make sense of what is, like all the pain that he sees around him. And I think that was his way of surrendering to what is, like, hey, perhaps the reason why I feel this pain and I see all of these pain around me is because that's the way it was meant to be. But because he never healed from that childhood trauma and all of that, he got stuck in that mentality. And also because he's an intellectual, he's able to argue for it. Like, I mean, you can argue
instead
for
of just being depressed.
Yeah, instead of being depressed, most people would just be depressed, right? And just call it a day. But he leaned into the depression and argued for it from a negative perspective. So, going back to that wheel of fortune that we talked about, like.
Oh, yeah.
So I felt like.
Boethius.
From Prometheus, right?
Yeah,
so Boethius.
Yeah.
So he got to the bottom and he always saw, I feel like a lot of his early childhood came from the bottom perspective. So it didn't even matter what was happening in around him, all the fortunes or anything.
It's like you go back up, you've inherited your family fortune, now you're an educated, wealthy person.
Doesn't make any difference
to
him
like you're on
because of his mind. And even also, I think there was something about when he taught in the University of Berlin across from another professor that spoke about the same thing too, but he's actually called the optimist professor or a philosopher. I don't remember his name. And his class was just, no one came to his class. Everyone came to the other class.
The optimist guy?
The optimist guy, because his was just cold and gloomy. Yeah. So my point is that he saw life from a negative perspective. And because of that negativity, he exuded that negative energy, and all he kept attracting was just negativity and negativity. And that negativity just reinforced, what he believed already. So all of his reality was just drenched in negativity. And being the philosopher he is able to argue for anything. And he just chose to argue for that negativity, as opposed to looking at things from a totally different perspective. Does that make sense?
And that would have been attractive to you?
Because I was going through a lot. Yes.
Yeah.
So this is prior to, I don't know how much you've listened to my YouTube, but this is I came from a very toxic household, the way I was raised, family issues, broken relationship with family, parents and things like that. So I was stuck for a while in this very self-defeated mindset of, they didn't love me, they didn't want me, all kind of stuff, that kind of stuff. It wasn't until I started looking at things from a different perspective, like, what if I turn this picture upside down? What if? And then when I turn the picture upside down, like, oh, wow, this is actually perfect. Like, my life is so perfect, it feels like I created it myself. Like, I'm the higher being that created it, So me sitting there talking about, oh, my mom didn't like me or my dad didn't like me. No, it's actually meant to be. That's actually the way it could be. And then
you should say thank you.
Exactly. Yes. Through the power of meditation, mindfulness, therapy, and all kinds of things, I've come to see things from a totally different perspective. Like, you know what? Thank you. Actually, what you did is objectively wrong. Don't get me wrong. You still need to be held accountable for some of the things that you did and said to me as a child. But all things considered, I am the best possible outcome that could have manifested from that union. Had you loved me better or hated me worse, I would have been a totally different person. A totally different child would have manifested that could handle that dynamic. Does that make sense? So I started looking at that picture differently. Even some of the things that I was dealing with, depression, anxiety, not being good enough, not being smart enough, not being tall enough, and all this nonsense, just like I'm like, actually, you know what, do I really want that? No, not really. So that's looking at it from the world's perspective. But then looking at it from a deeply rooted perspective, I guess, gaze your eyes upon Christ and everything else become dim. So the more I've tapped into that, it felt like, this feels more right. And now I'm able to look at this from a totally different perspective, right? But I still understand what he meant by saying there's pain and suffering, right? Which takes me to the conversation you and we had after class a few weeks ago, the difference between existential pain and suffering. I believe that life is meant to suck. It is what it is, right? It's part of the human experience. You can try to attribute it to, the fall of Adam and Eve from grace or whatever it is. But the reality still remains that the human experience is meant to be one that has existential pain. And no one has it better than the other. Even though it looks like someone has it better than you because they're a man and you're not, they're straight, you're not, they're richer, you're not, and white and all kinds of stuff. They still have reality. Their reality is still unique to them. They still have struggles that you can't relate, and so on and so forth. So the baseline comes from equal existential pain. But you can create suffering for yourself if you don't lean into what is. So it's all about looking at things from a totally different perspective. So ever since I started looking at things from a totally different perspective, and because I was once there, I'm able to understand where it's coming from. And I think there's one thing that he was struggling with. People didn't understand where he was coming from, and people just called him very negative. So negative. Like, to stay away from that guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and that also reinforced that negativity as well. Like, see, these people don't get it. And I think he had like a cat or something like that. He called I or something like that. Because he said the cat was the most purest form of God or whatever it is.
Oh my gosh.
It's just weird. So I get it, but I can argue against it because of how I've been able to move on from that.
Yeah,
it's a lot, I know.
No, but I appreciate the detail because, I mean, if someone who finds themselves like attracted to this kind of view, this really negative view, I mean, what are you supposed to do about it? And for Schopenhauer, I think what is his answer is like, well, you can escape it for a few moments, maybe through experience of beauty. Like if you're listening to music, like very mathematical music, like, like imagine Bach harpsichord or something. It's very mathematical, very regular, that in that moment you can kind of rest from the pain but just for a few moments.
Yeah.
And then you're back in it. And that's it. That's the only thing you have to look forward to, is maybe an escape for a little bit.
Yeah.
And like, wow, well, like how is someone supposed to live that way? Like, I don't see how anyone could do it. Like, you'd wind up like that. What's the character on that show? Did you ever watch the show True Detective?
No.
It was on HBO a few years ago, but Matthew McConaughey plays this police officer who has read Schopenhauer, and he actually references Schopenhauer in there. It's like, what are your views? He says, oh, I agree with Schopenhauer, and he describes something like this.
It's all crap.
and his character is just like barely holding on. You know, like at any moment, this guy could just. They ask him, you know, maybe trigger warning here, but like his partner asks us, like, well, if you feel this way, like, why don't you just take yourself out, you know? And he says, well, I don't have the courage.
I've been there.
Yeah, and it's like, well, if that's the only thing that philosophy has to offer, like, we can't do it. You know?
Yeah.
Like, we can't stop there. We can't accept that.
Yeah.
You know? Although the idea that like reality at its base is like ugly or just pain, it shows up in literature in weird places too. I don't know if you're a fan of the H.P. Lovecraft stuff, but you know the Cthulhu, right? You know what I'm talking about, the sort of octopus face thing with the bat wings. The Cthulhu. No, okay, it's kind of become a meme, but in the novel, in the story, it's this like the gods are actually sleeping under the earth, and all they want, they're just sort of full of anger and sadness, and then at any moment they'll awaken and then plunge the whole world into madness. Like if you looked at one long enough, your sanity would drain away because of how terrifying and awful these things were. And that is what's really beneath reality. It's like chaos, madness only. And then we kind of paper over it with society, but it's waiting to be revealed. And just this idea that reality is sort of is awful, you know, and we need to keep it covered. Some people get really attracted to that way of thinking.
I think, you know, I don't want to disrespect Schopenhauer because, you know, as a person who's been through a lot of things that he went through, I think it's disrespectful to just dismiss that.
Away, yeah.
You know what I mean? Because, you know, I feel like what he was missing was, what is it called? Like when you have someone on the same equal intellect as you.
A friend?
No, like a philosopher who is on the same equal intellect.
Interlocutor?
No, I forgot. I forgot what Dr. Gordon called it. I forgot, but like a peer, something peer.
Okay.
Like basically someone on the same intellectual
you can bounce these
capability
ideas
as you,
off of,
but who understands what he's been through. I feel like that's what it was missing. Because a philosopher who does not understand what he's been through is going to argue. It's just going to pierce, you know, like cause more harm, more damage than not. You know what I mean? And I just think, you know, like basically poke at his mind to show him from a totally different perspective. I do believe that there is order in all there is, right? You know, whether it's in the phenomenal world or in the noumenal world, there is order. And this order is not irrational. I think it's very rational. It is very precise, and its baseline is good, right? Now we can try to rationalize what goodness implies, right? I don't think goodness that's a whole other discussion, right? But I like to think of this goodness in the form of mathematics, right? In the form of numbers, for example, like 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way to positive infinity, negative infinity. It's very consistent. It's very, it's clean. It's neat. If you follow it, you would never, ever, ever get lost, if that makes sense. So that's that goodness that I like to describe it as, right? And I feel like everything follows that goodness except humans. And I think the exception is because humans have the gift or curse of ability to choose. You can choose as a human being to align with that goodness or align and away from it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I feel like oftentimes humans choose to align away from it because of the ego. You know, and I've talked about the ego, you know, you can call the ego the devil, Lucifer, serpent, whatever it is. But I believe that it operates in this realm of being. And it knows that it only exists here. It cannot exist beyond because it was cast out from everything else and brought here. And it knows that its time is limited. It would inevitably die. So its goal is to trap you here, you know. So it creates all these confusion, distractions, and things like that. It tempts you like it tempts Eve, right? So you can fall and remain in a docile mind, if that makes sense. And as a result, every time humans choose to align away from that goodness, the wages of that will be the malarkey you see, if that makes sense, right? So for a person who is already going through what he's going through, it will seem as though, madness and chaos, that's what it is. But that's not necessarily the case. You can choose to still pull away from that and align yourself with the goodness of what is. And I think once you align with the goodness of what is, it doesn't even matter what chaos you see around you. You will still have a piece of heaven within you, if that makes sense.
So let me ask you this, because that's a really interesting way to describe it, right? It's like turn from one and align with the other.
Yes.
Right? So if you're, say, maybe you've been reading too much Schopenhauer, and so now at this point your soul is like completely bound up in this idea of chaos and pain.
Okay.
How would you, like, there aren't any arguments that you could use, right?
Not your soul. Your soul cannot be bound by pain
or your perspective, or
your mind, because your soul will always be pure.
Okay, so your mind. So your mind is bound up in this.
Okay.
How would you be able to turn around?
That's what I'm saying.
Is this like an act of faith at that point, or?
I think you will always have opportunities. I think the actual goodness of everything around you you will always have opportunities to walk through that door. You will always have opportunities.
It's like goodness is calling to you.
Yeah, because the default is goodness. Your default, of course, is through your DNA, and everything else. There will always be opportunities there. Right? Whether it's in the people around you or whatever, opportunities will always be there. It's just more so about you recognizing them and actually choosing to align with it.
So is it something like you just have
distractions will always also be there as well.
Sure, yeah. Trying to keep you
exactly
wrapped up in that. Do you think like mainly what you have to do is like stop resisting the good?
I think
stop
mainly
fighting it and let goodness kind of magnetically pull you back to where you should be?
Yeah, but I think the key thing is to walk in silence. I talk about walking in silence here a lot. Buddhists also talk about that too. But being intentional to limit encounter with a lot of what exudes, I call it noise. But noise that I talk about is not necessarily like verbal noise. Like it's not like loudness. Yes, I don't like loudness, but I feel like anything that, I don't know how to explain it, but anything that exudes loud energy, stay away from it as much as possible, right? That includes people, places, and things.
It's just like it's the power of chaos breaking in.
Exactly. Because there's, you have to understand how the ego operates. The ego is very intelligent. It has all these attractive things around you. It's very glowing, attractive, and loud, right? But if you intentionally limit encounter with a lot of these things, places, and people, I feel like that goodness will be a lot more profound in you because it courses through you anyway. Now it's a matter of, are you going to walk through it or not? I also do think that part of a lot of what we call suffering is actually a gift from God in a way. Like, maybe I don't want to say God, but yeah, if you want to go there, to force you to be in silence. I think that's what happened with me because I'm a naturally stubborn person, and I feel like with me and a lot of these vices around, it'd be so easy for me to get lost in the world. And I went through things in my life that forced me to my knees. Like I was forced to be in silence. And it was like more like, okay, now I can hear these things more, right? Louder, right? It's now a matter of, are you going to listen and align with what is, or are you going to keep fighting it because you like to be the victim. You like to tell a story of how the world is so horrible to me and all this nonsense. You know what I mean? Yeah. So either way, all of these things are precise for you. Mine happened to be like that because it's perfect for me, because it's good and my default is good. It cares for you. So it's going to manifest itself in a way that is perfect for you. Yours will be different, and so on and so forth. It will always be there, but you still have to choose to embrace it or not. And one of the ways to recognize it is if you walk in silence.
So it's possible. So like from your perspective, redemption is possible.
It is possible for
Maybe
everyone.
it's like always possible.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I feel like for him, he probably fought it because of his high intellect. You know, like he didn't even give anyone a chance at
And
all.
that stubbornness. Right?
That stubbornness, yes. So I feel like I would like to argue that yes, he had so many opportunities and he just chose not to.
You know, this reminds me of something I had read about him. I don't know if this is true. So if we look up later and find out that this is totally fake, maybe this is just a story that's told about him. But someone asked him if you look back at his early works, that if he now look back at with some embarrassment maybe or disagreed with them because he was young then and he was an old man, and he said no, like I stand by everything that I ever wrote. And so maybe the problem is that he wrote this stuff down and now felt like I gotta stick to it.
Yeah.
I gotta stick to it. I can't be the one that turns his back on, like I spoke the truth. So,
that would be very egotistic, because I could see myself standing by what I said 10 years ago, but I'll defend it by defending my mentality then.
Yeah,
and still be
that's
humble.
Where I was then, but not now.
Yeah, but be humble enough to admit that, hey, I've grown.
Not this guy.
But I would not deny that I said that though. Maybe not.
Yeah.
But that's what I would argue. I think the mind is a very powerful tool. I think the mind is our portal to the noumena, or God, if you want to call it that. It is a powerful tool, and out of the mind into the world is what makes a difference in your human existence. But it's also a very dangerous place to get trapped in. And I think if you really want to help somebody see things from a totally different perspective, you have to shed all ego and connect with them as one and see them as though you are them. Show them love. I think sometimes all a person needs is someone who genuinely cares and connects with them. Like, hey, I understand, or I respect the fact that you feel this way. No one is shaming you for that, right? However, this, and that. Not just tell them, but also show them through, the way you live as well, that kind of stuff, and show patience. It takes a while, but you may be surprised. You may be that goodness, that piece of goodness through which you're able to light their candle.
See, I want to say like amen, but
amen.
I don't know if I'm allowed to.
Drop mic. Amen. Let the church say amen.
Yeah. No, I agree with you.
Yeah. So I think that was the key thing that was missing in his life. But then, to be fair, in this world of complete madness, it's someone has to. He fulfilled a purpose in this world. Someone has to do it, and it was sort of like Hitler. Someone had to be Hitler.
Well, I don't know if I go that far. You told me we were not allowed to talk about that. No, I'm glad he wrote what he did, just so that we have a way to really think about it. And he's such a great stylist.
Yeah.
His writing is so beautiful.
Yeah.
And maybe nobody could have written it better than him.
It's diabolic, but it's beautiful.
Yes, yeah. Maybe you're like, it's a beautiful thing, but I don't think.
Yeah.
I can't do it.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
But I mean, I think it's a powerful piece of literature. However, it's dangerously attractive to people who are already feeling something. Sort of like the guy in that show. It becomes he gets me. You know what I mean? And because it's such a very beautiful talker and beautiful writer, it just reels you in. It's sort of like a mermaid. Like a siren or whatever.
Siren, yeah.
It reels you in, but ultimately destruction is what waits. But for a person who has lost hope or touch with everyone else, everything else, like just very attractive. This is why we need to be very intentional with the information we'll put out there. And I'm glad that people like us were talking about these things and give you a totally different perspective. Anyway, me for example, by acknowledging that Yes, but this too as well.